The rain fell softly and silently, turning the cemetery into a sea of gray tones. The place was simple, almost lifeless, with sparse grass and soaked flower wreaths. Mateus stood next to little Sophia, her hand trembling in his. They were both wearing black, but the weight they carried was greater than any clothing could express. The coffin was slowly lowered into the grave, and the priest's low voice intoned a prayer. The words were lost in the humid air, swallowed up by the heavy atmosphere of the moment. Sophia looked at her father, her face wet with tears mixed with the rain. Her eyes, large and bright, searched for something he didn't know if he could offer. An explanation. "Daddy." Her voice was broken, muffled by her crying. "Why did Mommy leave?" Mateus swallowed hard. The lump in his throat seemed to make any answer impossible. He bent down until he was at her height, holding his daughter's small hands firmly. "I don't know, my flower," he answered, his voice hoarse. "But we are together, and we always will be. I promise," Sophia nodded, sobbing, as Mateus pulled her into a hug. He felt the weight of not only his pain, but hers as well. He needed to be strong, even when everything inside him was falling apart. Relatives approached, some offering words of comfort, others just touching the shoulder or silently waving. Each gesture, no matter how well-intentioned, seemed insufficient to fill the void that was now part of them. When the ceremony came to an end, Mateus took Sophia by the hand and walked with her back to the car. The road seemed long, and the house that awaited them even longer. Once so full of life, that place was now a bitter reminder of what they had lost. That night, as he put Sophia to bed, he tried to keep up the routine of reading a children's story. His voice was choked, but he persisted. Sophia, still with tears in her eyes, broke the silence by whispering, "Daddy, are you leaving too?" Mateus felt his heart tighten. He leaned over, kissed her forehead, and replied firmly, "Never, Sophia. I will never abandon you." With that promise, he let her fall asleep, while he struggled to accept that, from then on, he would be the safe haven for both of them. The longing for Anna was unbearable, but his love for Sophia would be his strength. Silence was the new resident of the house. Before the mornings were filled with the sound of coffee being brewed, Sophia's laughter as Anna tickled her, and the quiet conversations between Mateus and his wife about the day's plans. Now, everything seemed devoid of life. Only Mateus's solitary footsteps and the low murmur of the television broke the monotony. Sophia tried to adapt to Anna's absence the way a 6-year-old child can. She spent hours drawing pictures of the family, her father, and her mother, who always appeared smiling, even now that she was no longer there. She never said anything, but Mateus could feel the pain in the most delicate lines of her drawings. Her grief was in every colored line, in every cloud she drew in the sky with her mother's name. Mateus, on the other hand, took refuge in his work. As the owner of a growing technology company, he immersed himself in reports, meetings, and projects to keep his mind occupied. At night, when he finally laid his head on the pillow, emptiness took over. The smell of Anna's perfume still permeated the pillow next to him, and he found himself, more than once, turning to the side of the bed, as if expecting to see her there. One night, while he was reviewing a report on the computer, Sophia approached him, holding a math notebook. "Daddy, can you help me with this?" she asked, grimacing. Mateus closed the laptop, focusing all his attention on his daughter. "Of course, my flower. What's hard?" She pointed to a complicated sum for her age. He laughed softly, guiding her patiently. "Let's solve it together." As he explained the numbers, he He noticed how Sophia looked at him with admiration, as if the simple fact of being together was enough. At that moment, Mateus understood that the pain would never completely disappear, but that his presence was all Sophia needed. As the months went by, the routine stabilized, although marked by a hint of sadness. Special dates, such as Sophia's birthday, were particularly difficult. When cutting the cake, she would look at the empty chair where Anna used to sit and sigh. Mateus always did his best to fill the void, but he knew that only time could help. One Saturday afternoon, Sophia surprised him by asking, "Daddy, Mommy is in heaven, isn't she? Does she see us?" Mateus hesitated, but answered sincerely, "Yes, my flower. I think she's up there, looking down on us and taking care of us in a special way." Sophia smiled slightly. "Then I'm going to draw her a letter. That way she can see from heaven." Mateus couldn't hold back the tears. He hugged his daughter and felt, even in the midst of the pain, a glimmer of hope. They were learning, together, to move on. The months had turned into a year since the loss of Anna. The routine had adjusted, but her absence still hung over Mateus and Sophia like a shadow. He dedicated himself entirely to work to support the household and distract himself from the emptiness, while Sophia began to find small ways to deal with her longing, such as her drawings and long conversations with her father. It was in this context that Fernanda entered their lives. She was a systems analyst recommended by a business partner, and her reputation preceded her. Organized, competent, and above all, discreet. On her first day at the company, Fernanda arrived punctually, wearing an elegant but unpretentious outfit. She greeted her colleagues with a polite smile and went to Mateus's office to introduce herself. "Good morning, Mr. Mateus. I'm Fernanda, your new analyst. It's a pleasure to be part of the team." Mateus, who preferred informality, smiled slightly. "Please just call me Mateus. Welcome." Over the weeks, Fernanda proved to be an exemplary professional. She delivered accurate reports, solved problems before they were even noticed, and occasionally suggested improvements to the company's processes. Her calm and efficient demeanor did not go unnoticed, and Mateus began to value her not only for her competence, but also for the lightheartedness she brought to the environment. It was one Saturday afternoon that Fernanda unintentionally crossed the line between work and personal life. Mateus had decided to take Sophia to the mall to distract her. It was a simple plan: ice cream, a stroll through the shop windows, and a visit to the bookstore. Sophia seemed excited, pointing out toys and books she would like to win. While they were examining a red dress in a children's store, a familiar voice called Mateus from behind. "Mateus?" When he turned around, he saw Fernanda. She was there, wearing jeans and a light-colored blouse, with a shopping bag in her hand. Her loose hair gave her a relaxed appearance that he had never noticed in the office. "Fernanda, what a surprise," he said, surprised. "I came to buy a present for my nephew," she replied, pointing to the bag. "What about you? Are you out with your family?" Mateus hesitated, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest when he heard the word family. He tried to answer, normally. "I'm with my daughter, Sophia. I wanted to distract her for a while." Sophia, who was standing next to him, looked at Fernanda curiously. Mateus introduced her. "Sophia, this is Fernanda. She works with me." The shy girl said hi, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Fernanda bent down to her level. "Hi, Sophia. Your father talks about you a lot. He said you're great at drawing." Sophia smiled a little, surprised by the attention. "I like, drawings, flowers, and people." The conversation flowed naturally, and Mateus, on an awkward impulse, invited her. "Fernanda, do you want to have some ice cream with us? We don't want to disturb you, but it would be nice." Fernanda hesitated for a moment, but accepted. Why not? I've already finished my shopping. Sitting in the food court, Mateus noticed something that touched him. Fernanda asked Sophia genuine questions, showing interest in the girl's favorite cartoons and books. Sophia, in turn, seemed comfortable, something rare since Anna's death. As he watched the interaction, Mateus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a lightness in his heart. For a moment, the weight of Anna's absence seemed less suffocating. At the end of that day, while they watched a children's movie at the cinema, Mateus couldn't help but think about Fernanda. She had been an unexpected but pleasantly light presence. Perhaps he reflected, there was room for new connections in his life, even if it was still too early to imagine anything beyond a good relationship. Fernanda's presence began to become more frequent, albeit discreetly. At work, she continued to demonstrate efficiency and an impeccable professional demeanor. But there was something in the way she treated Sophia that caught Mateus's attention. Whenever the girl visited her father's office on days when school was quieter, Fernanda made a point of talking to her, complimenting her drawings, or asking about her classes. "You're very talented, Sophia," Fernanda said on one of these occasions, watching the girl color a sheet full of flowers and clouds. "Have you ever thought about creating a story to go with your drawings?" Sophia smiled shyly. "Maybe, I like making up stories." Mateus, as he passed by the hallway and watched the two interacting, felt something new: gratitude. Seeing Sophia smiling was something he hadn't seen often since Anna's death, and realizing that Fernanda had this natural ability to connect with her awakened in Mateus an admiration that went beyond work. Casual encounters outside the office also helped to strengthen the bond, connection. One Saturday, Mateus and Sophia ran into Fernanda again at the mall. This time, the interaction was longer, culminating in a quick coffee. While Sophia talked animatedly about children's books and drawings, Fernanda listened with genuine attention, interacting in a way that made the girl feel valued. "Daddy, Fernanda's cool," Sophia said on the way home, with a smile on her lips. "She likes books and drawing too." Mateus just smiled, surprised at how much that phrase brought him comfort. The weekends began to include small invitations: an afternoon at the park, a family lunch, even visits to Mateus's house, where Sophia proudly showed off her drawings. Fernanda never pushed the issue. She seemed to understand the limits of a family that was still healing, and that only increased Mateus's respect for her. One time, over coffee after work, Fernanda asked, "Mateus, how have you been dealing with everything? It must be hard raising Sophia alone." He hesitated for a moment, sensing the honesty in the question. "Some days are harder than others, but Sophia keeps me going. I do what I can, one day at a time." Fernanda smiled, leaning slightly in her chair. "You're doing an incredible job. It's easy to see how much she admires you." Mateus thanked her, but kept those words to himself. He wasn't sure what to think about this relationship that was forming. Was it just gratitude for someone who seemed to care about his daughter, or was there something more there? Time would tell. For now, he just appreciated the lightness that Fernanda brought, both to him and to Sophia. As the months went by, Fernanda's presence in Mateus and Sophia's lives became increasingly constant, between interactions at work and occasional meetings outside the office. She discreetly integrated herself into the routine of the small family. It was in this context that the first suggestions for changes in Mateus's home arose. "Have you ever thought about modernizing the house?" Fernanda asked casually as they drank coffee in the living room. "It's a beautiful place, but a few improvements could make it more functional and cozy." Mateus looked around, realizing for the first time that the house really needed some attention. The walls were faded, the old floor creaked in places, and the furniture seemed more utilitarian than welcoming. I never stopped to think about it. Since Anna left, priorities have changed. Fernanda smiled softly. It doesn't have to be anything big. Small adjustments would make a difference. That's how the first changes began. A new coat of paint for the living room, a more comfortable sofa, curtains that let in more natural light. Mateus, although hesitant at first, began to see the value of these changes, especially when Sophia showed enthusiasm for the new additions. "Look, Dad, the curtains let the sun in beautifully," Sophia said, noting the light reflecting off the living room floor. However, Fernanda's suggestions soon began to grow in scale. The renovation, which had initially been limited to decorative details, became a more ambitious project. Fernanda proposed replacing the living room floor with light wood, installing larger windows to save energy, and even remodeling the staircase that led to the upper floor. Mateus began to feel a little uncomfortable. "Isn't that too much, Fernanda? The house is functional as it is. I don't want to turn it into a construction site." Fernanda responded calmly but determinedly. "I understand. But think about how these changes can increase the value of the property. Besides, making the space more modern could be good for Sophia too, creating a more welcoming space for her." Mateus, although reluctant, agreed. He trusted Fernanda's intentions and wanted to believe that everything was for Sophia's own good. The construction work began, bringing with it the constant noise of hammers, saws, and workers throughout the house. Sophia, who had been excited at first, soon began to feel uncomfortable. "Daddy, I can't do my chores with all this noise, and the dust is getting into my room." Upon hearing this, Mateus tried to calm her down. "I know, my dear. Fernanda said she'll finish it quickly. Just hold on a little longer, okay?" Sophia nodded, but the sparkle in her eyes was gone. The girl who found comfort in the familiarity of her home now saw the space transformed into something strange. The situation became more complicated when Fernanda insisted on changing the staircase. The old simple and functional one would be replaced by a modern model, with smooth material steps and metal edges. Mateus became apprehensive as soon as he saw the project. "Fernanda, this looks dangerous. Sophia could slip." "Don't worry," she said in a nonchalant tone. "The material is safe, and if necessary, we can put discreet anti-slip strips." Mateus agreed, although with an uncomfortable feeling. Deep down, he began to question whether all these changes were really necessary or if they were going beyond the limits of what was reasonable. That night, when he put Sophia to bed, the girl asked quietly, "Daddy, why does the house need to change so much? I liked it the way it was before." Mateus felt his heart sink. "I know, my dear. We're just trying to make things better for you. I promise that when this is all over, it will be calmer." But he himself wasn't so sure. The routine of renovations and constant noise had transformed the house into a different place, almost unrecognizable. Sophia, who used to find comfort at home, now spent more time locked in her room, trying to escape the chaos. Mateus was also exhausted, but he tried to keep the peace. It was in the midst of this scenario that an unexpected work trip changed the course of history. On that Friday morning, Mateus received an urgent call from his partner at the company. An important contract required his presence in another city for final discussions and signing. He hesitated to accept. Sophia was already sensitive to the changes at home, and leaving her with Fernanda, even temporarily, made him apprehensive. "Fernanda," he began, finding her in the living room, rearranging some pillows. "I need to travel for work. I'm leaving this afternoon and I'll be back as soon as possible. Can you take care of Sophia? Fernanda smiled, calm as ever. Of course, Mateus. Don't worry, she'll be fine with me. Go easy. Sophia, hearing her father talk about the trip, appeared in the hallway with a sketchbook in her hands. Daddy, are you going to be gone? Long? Mateus knelt down to be at her height and held her small hands. I'll be back soon, my flower. Fernanda will take care of you. You trust me, don't you? Sophia nodded, although her eyes showed insecurity. Okay, but come back soon. Mateus left late in the afternoon, carrying a mix of worries and confidence. He knew that Fernanda was responsible and affectionate with Sophia, but something was bothering him deeply, like a silent warning that he couldn't ignore. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Fernanda went to her room. Meanwhile, Sophia, alone in her bed, heard a sound coming from outside. It was a low meow, almost pleading. Curious, she got up, walked to the window, and saw a small gray cat at the entrance of the house. He looked hungry, huddled against the cold. Poor thing, she murmured. Sophia loved animals, especially cats, and the idea of leaving him there, helpless, was unbearable. Without thinking twice, she went downstairs in silence, opened the front door, and went outside. The cold night wind immediately enveloped her, and she crouched down to get closer to the cat. But as soon as she did, the door closed behind her with a bang. Sophia tried to turn the handle, but it was locked. No! She screamed, banging on the door. Fernanda, open the door! She climbed onto the sill and looked at Fernanda's bedroom window, which was partially open. Sophia saw a shadow move inside. Fernanda! Help me, please! She screamed, desperate. Fernanda appeared at the window for a moment. Her eyes met Sophia's, but to the girl's shock, she simply closed the window, turning off the lights in the room soon after. Sophia kept knocking on the door, but the cold and exhaustion began to take over. Feeling abandoned, she huddled near the entrance of the house, hugging her knees and shivering until she fell asleep. Mateus was driving down the road when the phone rang. He answered it, worried about the late hour. Mateus, it's me, Carla, said the urgent voice of his assistant. Sophia's in the hospital. She was found on the street, unconscious, in a state of hypothermia. Mateus's world fell apart. What do you mean? What happened? Where was Fernanda? He didn't wait for a full answer. He turned the car at the next exit and sped back home. When he arrived at the hospital, he went straight to the emergency room. Sophia was lying on a stretcher, wrapped in thermal blankets, with doctors and nurses monitoring her vital signs. Seeing her so vulnerable, Mateus felt a knot in his chest. He approached, holding her hand. I'm here, my darling. Daddy's here. The doctor explained that Sophia was in critical but stable condition. She was found by a neighbor. We're still evaluating, but it's possible that she'll survive without any after effects if everything goes well. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Fernanda was sitting, huddled in a corner. Mateus approached, his fury contained in every step. What happened, Fernanda? How did you let this happen? Fernanda looked up, visibly uncomfortable. I don't know. I put her to sleep, and when I realized she was no longer in the room. Mateus, now out of patience, replied, Sophia said she saw you at the window. She asked for your help. Did you ignore her? Fernanda's silence was answer enough. Mateus felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could someone he had trusted so much have done something like that? He would not wait for any more answers. His priority now was Sophia. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Mateus. Despite the medical efforts, Sophia did not react as expected. The situation was serious, and the doctors, cautious, began to prepare Mateus for the worst. We will do everything in our power. but the chances of a full recovery are minimal, said the head doctor with a sad expression. Mateus spent nights in the hospital, holding Sophia's small hand and praying silently. He begged for a miracle, any sign that his daughter would open her eyes again, smile, live again. But the miracle did not come at that moment. Days later, Sophia was declared dead. The wake was marked by a suffocating silence. Only a few relatives and close friends attended. Mateus was devastated, unable to process the loss. The small white coffin, surrounded by pale flowers, seemed a surreal sight. Sophia lay there, motionless, and Matthew felt as if his heart had been ripped out. He remained by the coffin the entire time, holding Sophia's cold little hand as if he could still protect her. His lips murmured words that no one could hear, a mix of prayers and outbursts, while tears streamed down his face. The moment the coffin began to close, something inexplicable happened. Matthew felt a slight movement in Sophia's hand. At first, he thought it was an illusion caused by despair, but to his shock, her finger really moved. "She's alive!" Matthew shouted, moving away from the coffin and holding Sophia's hand tighter. "I saw it. She moved." Those present looked at each other, confused and incredulous. Some thought Matthew was delirious, overcome by grief. But then in front of everyone, Sophia's eyes slowly opened. Her breathing was weak, but she was there. The wake turned into chaos. Relatives cried, others screamed in surprise, and someone quickly called an ambulance. Mateus held his daughter in his arms, unable to believe what was happening. "My princess, you're back." The doctors confirmed what seemed impossible. Sophia was alive, despite everything. A medical error had led to the diagnosis of premature death due to the extreme weakness of her vital signs. It was a rare case, but not unheard of. While Mateus thanked the heavens for his daughter's recovery, a shadow hung over the miracle. During Sophia's recovery, she began to remember and recount what had happened that night. "Daddy," Sophia said, still lying in the hospital bed, her voice low and hesitant. "I saw Fernanda. I called her. I asked her to open the door, but she didn't open it. She just closed the window and left." Mateus felt his blood run cold when he heard that. Each word his daughter said was like a blade cutting deep. He held her small hand and asked carefully, "Are you sure, my flower? Did she see you?" Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "She saw me, Dad, but she didn't help me." At the hospital, Fernanda was still present, but something in her demeanor had changed. When she realized that Sophia's story was being heard by the doctors and the police investigating the case, she became visibly nervous. Mateus, unable to contain his anger, confronted her directly. "Did you leave her outside?" he asked, his voice shaking with indignation. "Did you see my daughter that night and ignore her?" Fernanda tried to deny it, but her answers were evasive. When the police approached to ask questions, she began to evade them, claiming that she had gotten confused, that she hadn't heard Sophia calling. But it was too late. Sophia's story and Fernanda's behavior began to raise more serious suspicions. Sophia's revelation about Fernanda's negligence brought a mixture of shock and indignation to Mateus. His daughter's story was clear and consistent. Fernanda had seen her through the window that fateful night, but chose to ignore her. This was something Mateus could not accept, and his trust in Fernanda turned into a mixture of anger and betrayal. At the hospital, while Sophia continued to recover, Mateus found Fernanda in the hallway. She had her arms crossed and an expression of obvious discomfort. When he approached, the tension between them was palpable. "You owe me an explanation," Mateus said, his voice low but filled with contained fury. "How could you leave Sophia out there? She called you, And you ignored her. Fernanda shook her head, trying to justify herself. Mateus, I didn't know. I was tired. I thought it was some noise in the street. I didn't imagine it was Sophia. You didn't know? Mateus raised his voice. She saw you. She called for help, and you simply closed the window. How can someone do that to a child? Especially a child who trusted you. Fernanda tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She knew that any apology would be insufficient. Mateus's look, full of contempt and pain, made her realize that the truth was out in the open, and that nothing could repair what had happened. Days later, while the police continued to investigate, Mateus received the news that Fernanda had been called to testify. The pressure on her was increasing, and this made her visibly nervous. At home, the tension reached its limit. One morning, Mateus decided to confront her for the last time. He wanted clear and honest answers, something that Fernanda had avoided until then. "Why did you do this, Fernanda?" he asked, his voice firm but tired. "I trusted you. I trusted you with my daughter. How could you leave her at the mercy of the cold?" Fernanda, now without the mask of calm she used to wear, began to lose control. "I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt Sophia, but I was frustrated. Everything seemed to revolve around her, and I felt left out." The words were like knives to Mateus's heart. Left aside? Are you saying that your justification for ignoring a child's plea for help was jealousy? "I don't know!" Fernanda shouted, tears of despair streaming down her face. "I just wanted to be important to you, but Sophia always came first." Mateus looked at her in disbelief. "Of course she comes first. She's my daughter. And if you don't understand that, you never had a place here." Fernanda, overcome by a mixture of guilt and anger, turned abruptly and began to climb the newly renovated stairs, the ones she had insisted on replacing. But the smooth floor, combined with her unstable emotional state, was a fatal combination. On the second flight, she slipped. Mateus, who was following closely behind her, tried to catch her, but he wasn't fast enough. Fernanda fell, hitting the steps hard until she stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The sound of the impact echoed through the house. "Fernanda!" Mateus ran to her. Despite all his anger and betrayal, he couldn't leave her there without help. He picked up his cell phone and called 911. At the hospital, Fernanda was diagnosed with serious injuries, including a blood clot in her brain and fractures that compromised some of her mobility. She would be dependent on medical care for a long time, perhaps forever. For Mateus, Fernanda's fall symbolized the complete collapse of the trust he had placed in her. But more importantly, it reinforced a painful lesson. He needed to be more cautious about allowing anyone into Sophia's life. After Fernanda's accident, the police investigation moved quickly. Mateus, still dealing with Sophia's emotional recovery, was called to give new statements. The case had already attracted attention for the sequence of dramatic events: the neglect of Sophia, the miracle at the wake, and now Fernanda's accident. As Mateus tried to move on, caring for Sophia and reorganizing his priorities, the police shared disturbing information with him. At first, Mateus hesitated to believe it, but the evidence was clear. Fernanda was not who he thought she was. The home improvements, which initially seemed like well-intentioned improvements, had another purpose. Documents and bank transactions investigated by the police showed that Fernanda diverted part of the funds to personal accounts. She inflated the costs of the work and justified the expenses with materials and services that were never used. Mateus felt the ground give way beneath his feet. She used my trust. She used my house. and put Sophia's life at risk out of greed. His voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. The police also revealed something even darker. Fernanda saw Sophia as an obstacle. The love and dedication Mateus had for his daughter were seen by Fernanda as barriers to gaining more space in his life. To her, Sophia was an inconvenient presence, and the neglect that cold night seemed to have been a deliberate attempt to eliminate her. Mateus reflected on all this as he watched Sophia play in the backyard. She seemed lighter, slowly returning to the happy and creative girl she had been before. But he couldn't shake the fact that Fernanda, someone he had let into their lives, had almost destroyed everything. One day when he picked up Sophia from school, she asked him an unexpected question. "Daddy, do you think Mommy protects me from heaven?" Mateus paused, feeling the weight of the question, but smiled softly. "I'm sure, my flower, and I'm here to protect you too. Always." Sophia smiled, holding her father's hand tightly. At that moment, Mateus understood that the strength of his relationship with Sophia was the foundation of everything. He didn't need anyone else to complete the little family they formed. After the accident, Fernanda was hospitalized and underwent several surgeries. Although she survived, the consequences were severe. She lost some of her mobility and became dependent on constant care. Mateus, despite feeling resentful, decided not to sue her. For him, what mattered was that Sophia was safe, and the cycle of pain had ended. The authorities, however, pressed ahead with the case. Fernanda was convicted of fraud and embezzlement, in addition to being investigated for child neglect. Her life, once so ambitious, was now confined to dependence and isolation. Over time, Mateus began to reorganize the house. He hired a team to undo the changes made by Fernanda, bringing back the simplicity and comfort of before. The dangerous staircase was replaced with a safe one, and Sophia felt like her true home again. Father and daughter began to enjoy their time together more. Trips to the park, movie nights, and afternoons with drawing and stories became routine. Mateus realized that he didn't need anyone else to fill the void left by Anna. He and Sophia were enough. One morning, while Sophia drew at the kitchen table, Mateus made coffee. She lifted the paper and showed a new drawing, a garden full of flowers and a sunny sky. "Look, Daddy, this is our home. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mateus smiled, moved. "It's more than beautiful, Sophia. It's perfect, just like us." Time passed, and the scars of the tragedy were replaced by new memories. Mateus and Sophia began to find peace in their simple routine, rebuilding their lives together. The house, now more peaceful, had become a home again. Not just a physical space, but an emotional refuge where they could both feel safe and happy. With the renovations undone, Sophia felt comfortable at home again. The sound of her laughter filled the rooms again, and Mateus made sure to be present at every special moment. He never let an opportunity pass by to show her how important she was. Weekends were dedicated to activities that strengthened the bond between father and daughter. Mateus took Sophia to the park, where they played, flew kites, and even played soccer. Other times, they would explore bookstores, looking for new books for their nights of reading. "Daddy, this story has a brave princess," Sophia said one day, holding up a book with vibrant illustrations. "Am I brave too?" Matthew smiled, bending down to her level. "You are the bravest girl I know. You've been through so much, and you still manage to smile. That's what being a real princess is all about." Sophia's face lit up, and she hugged her father tightly. For Matthew, these moments meant everything. He knew that life would be full of challenges, but as long as they were together, they could face anything. Matthew also learned a lot from what had happened. He became more cautious, less willing to trust people blindly. This didn't mean he had lost faith in others, but now he always put Sophia first and listened more carefully to his instincts. When asked by friends about the possibility of finding a new love, Matthew was honest. "I'm not in a hurry. My focus right now is Sophia. If someone comes along, it will be someone who really deserves to be part of our lives." And that decision left him at peace. He knew that as long as he had Sophia, he had everything he needed. The seasons passed. The harsh winter that had almost taken Sophia was replaced by a spring full of flowers. Sophia loved to draw in the garden in the backyard, now vibrant with color and life. Summer brought laughter by the pool and walks on the beach, while fall painted the ground with golden leaves, making every walk an adventure. One night, as he read to Sophia before bed, Matthew noticed how fast his daughter was growing. She listened attentively to the story, her eyes shining with curiosity. When the story was over, she asked, "Daddy, do you think Mommy is happy with us?" Matthew felt a lump in his throat, but he smiled. "I'm sure, my flower. She must be so proud of how strong and incredible you are." "And of you too," Sophia added, hugging him, "because you're the best daddy in the world." Matthew turned off the light in the room. His heart warmed by those words. He knew that, despite everything, they had won. The love between father and daughter was enough to rebuild what had been broken. Life went on with its ups and downs, but Mateus and Sophia stayed together, more united than ever. He watched her grow, develop her creativity, and blossom into a resilient and happy child. Mateus learned that although the pain of the past never completely disappears, love and care can transform any situation. They were a small but powerful family, and that was enough.